Awesome. I'm so sorry this is the last Seattle subway presentation, but let's get started. So I'm sure many of you have heard of the term environmental justice. It has become a bit of a buzzword lately, but the goal of this language is to describe the growing ecological inequities faced by communities of color and low-income communities, those least equipped to protect their natural resources or mitigate against the effects of climate change. Now, when I talk about these ecological inequities and harms, I mean things such as access to clean water, proximity to waste facilities, or proper air quality, just to name a few. Now, the communities that have the least resources to mitigate against these effects are the ones burdened by them the most. So because of the growing or continued historic and overall injustices faced by these communities, environmental justice has become a requirement within environmental law. Now, environmental justice is considered primarily through the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. NEPA is legislation that requires government agencies to consider how their actions will impact the environment before they make any final decisions. Now, if there will be a significant environmental impact, then an environmental impact statement, or EIS, must be prepared. Now, the primary way for communities to advocate for their environmental justice needs is through these environmental impact statements, and specifically through a public comment. Public comments are when communities can evaluate a proposed government's plan and then speak on it either online or provide feedback in a meeting. Now, this is really important. Public comments are the only way that communities can advocate for their environmental justice needs. So although public comments and EIS are well established within NEPA, they may not represent the most effective way to consider environmental equity. So this is why I asked the question, how do communities wish to have their environmental justice needs addressed during large-scale projects through environmental impact statements or other considerations within NEPA? So I explored this question this summer through my internship with Seattle Subway Foundation, which, as we've learned, is an all-volunteer-run advocacy group focused on link light rail expansion in Seattle. Specifically, I worked in the community of South Park on community outreach and transit education. Now, during my time in South Park, I familiarized myself with their environmental challenges, such as industrial pollution in the Duwamish River. I attended weekly farmers markets, monthly neighborhood association meetings, and I attended events such as the Duwamish River Festival. While I was working on my internship, I was also collecting data. I did this by conducting interviews with local residents who expressed their own environmental justice concerns. I then surveyed local residents and also, supplemented this research with a literature review. The findings of my research culminated in three main topics here, summarized as complex definitions and terminology, delayed timing of public engagement, and lack of meaningful engagement. So the first of which involved complex definitions of environmental justice and then technical jargon used during project descriptions. So through my literature review, I found that the changing definitions of environmental justice often meant that people in professional and scholarly worlds were concerned or unsure of how to implement environmental justice. Interviewees then had similar comments. They were often unsure of what they were allowed to consider environmental justice. And then they also expressed that during public comments, they were unsure of what a project may entail due to the jargon used in its description. My second major finding then focused on kind of the delayed timing of public engagement. So communities expressed that they wanted longer periods for public engagement. They also wanted to have more accessible times for events and things like that, and ultimately wanted to be brought into the process earlier when there's more flexibility within a project. Then finally, communities members expressed the need to have paid opportunities to advocate for their environmental justice needs. They also want to have deeper forms of community engagement that aim to understand the complex dynamics within a community. And finally, they wanted to have long-standing and trusted organization used for outreach. So overall, starting involvement earlier, utilizing clear language, and utilizing these long-standing community connections are all vital to positive environmental justice implementation. But what does this all mean? Well, environmental and socioeconomic considerations identified by outside researchers during the EIS process may fail to recognize the nuanced relationships and dynamics within a community. Thus, a bottom-up approach focused on community collaboration will be more effective in implementing environmental justice. And ultimately, the barriers to environmental justice implementation need to be addressed through policies and procedures within NEPA. basically to make sure that communities are centered within this application of environmental justice and keep communities within the cycle of environmental law. So talking about these effects of climate change, with longer and deeper forms of community engagement, we can help mitigate some of these effects and make sure that they're not disproportionately distributed between low-income and minority communities. And this can be done through more effective communication. I would like to thank everybody here tonight, and then especially my faculty advisor, Lawrence Waters, my site supervisor, Arthur Bacchus, my whole Capstone cohort, especially Riley, who you'll hear from later, and then all of my friends and family. Thank you. Okay, sorry. Awesome.
Time for one or two questions.
Yeah, anyone have any questions? Yes. Yeah, so thank you so much for that question. So the question was, how do communities get funding to do something like paid opportunities for environmental justice advocacy? And this is something that's not necessarily done right now. So many of you may have heard of environmental impact statements. Sometimes you'll see numbers such as this environmental impact statement took 5 years and cost $5 million, right? Like pretty big numbers as far as money comes. Because these environmental impact statements are required under NEPA, government agencies have to invest time in creating them, right? It's the law. The thing would be is kind of allocating this funding to get communities to do that community outreach instead. So rather than having agency workers work on that collaboration and that kind of time with communities, get community organizations involved and pay them instead of, you know, other employees or bringing outside firms to do the environmental impact statements. Yeah. Yeah, any other questions? Yeah, all the way in back. Yeah, thank you so much for the question. So if you guys didn't hear, a question was about whether these strategies could be applied to other environmental issues. And I can't speak personally, but I imagine so. I think when we talk about environmental issues, it's very easy to look at them from kind of an outside perspective, rather than considering those like actually impacted by whatever the issue is. So a lot of my research was really kind of focused on making sure that communities have their voices heard and that they are the ones that get to advocate for what should or should not happen, in this case, within a project. So I absolutely think they could. I think the goal is to center communities and kind of their stories and everything like that. Yeah, does that answer your question? Yeah, okay, thank you.
All right.